On the people side, we employ 978,000 individuals, about 3% of the UK's workforce. That's almost 1 million people working towards social good. And let's not forget our volunteers. 14.2 million people, or 27% of the UK population, formally volunteered in 21-22. Their contribution underpins so much of what we achieve. By subsector, social services is the largest, with 1 in 5 organizations focusing on frontline essential services. So while the sector is thriving in many ways, it's also under pressure. Small organizations in particular bear a huge load. As we move forward, we'll explore these dynamics further and what they mean for the future. Next slide. This year's almanac reveals 3 major themes that paint a vivid picture of where the voluntary sector stands today and the pressing challenges it must address to secure its future. First, small charities continue to be hardest hit. While the sector as a whole has grown, these organizations that make up 80% of the sector are struggling to keep pace. They are the beating heart of our communities, working tirelessly with limited resources to meet growing demand. Yet their reliance on government funding and contracts, paired with rising operational costs, is stretching them to the limit. So the critical question we face is this: how do we support these vital organizations so that they can continue their essential work? Second, the workforce is experiencing significant pressures. With 978,000 people employed, nearly 2/3 of them are women, a testament to the sector's inclusivity. And while there's been progress in diversity, with 13% of employees from global majority backgrounds, we do have a unique challenge: the oldest workforce in the UK, with 28% aged 55 years or older. This brings us to an urgent consideration. How can we attract younger, more diverse talent to ensure that the sector continues to remain vibrant and innovative? Third, government funding is in decline. It now accounts for just 26% of the sector's income, a 4% drop from the previous year. This trend disproportionately affects small charities, many of which rely heavily on government contracts to deliver essential services. This shift forces us to ask this question: where will sustainable funding come from in the future, and how will this impact the sector's ability to serve those in need? These themes aren't just challenges, they are opportunities for reflection and action. Over the next few slides, we'll explore each of these themes in greater detail, considering the steps we need to take to tackle these issues head on. Let's dive into our first theme. Small charities continue to be hardest hit. To kick things off, I'd like to hear from you. A poll question will pop up on your screens just now. Please take a moment to respond to the question. Holly, if I can have the poll question coming up, please.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's visible to the others, but it's not visible to me. Oh, yes, there it is.
Yeah, you should see that now.
Oh, perfect. I can see it just now.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, people ask everyone. Yeah, you're answering the questions. Perfect. I think I'll just give it a few more seconds to see if it stabilizes. This is really interesting to see how people respond. Let's reveal the correct response. I think somebody's saying in the chat they can't see the poll. It should pop up right on your screen, Emily.
I mean, it's ended now. So Nayara, you have the results, but
perfect. Thank you, Holly. We have 2 more poll questions coming up in the next few slides. So make sure you grab those. Thank you all for your responses. It's interesting, but the answer was wrong. The majority chose the wrong answer. If you chose 37%, that's the correct answer. So in 21-22, micro and small organizations received 37% of their income from government sources, which is the largest proportion of their overall income. This is a sharp increase from 15% in 2020-21, which highlights both the growing dependence of small charities on government funding and the precariousness of their financial situation. This reliance on government income, while vital, comes with its own set of challenges, especially given the decline in overall government funding, which we'll explore later. But for now, let's think about this. How can we ensure that small charities are not left vulnerable to these shifts and are supported to thrive despite the financial pressures that they face? Next slide, please. That's on theme 1. So let's dive into the financial picture of the voluntary sector, because the numbers here tell a complex and layered story, particularly for small charities. On the surface, income has outpaced expenditure, but just barely. This delicate balance raises an urgent question. How long can we sustain this fragile equilibrium? Here's what we do know. So for micro and small charities, total expenditure has dropped significantly from 2.8 billion to 2.1 billion. These charities are spending less, even as demand for their services continue to grow. This isn't just about budgeting, it's about survival in a competitive and uncertain funding environment, especially in times of economic volatility. Yet across the sector as a whole, spending on services and programs has seen a sharp rise from 44.7 billion to 52.3 billion. Charities are clearly stepping up, but the question remains, can this level of investment be sustained in the long run? And then there's the stark reality of inequality. Micro and small charities make up 80% of the sector, but they account for just 3% of its income and spending. Meanwhile, we have large, major, and super major organizations that continue to dominate, representing just 4% of the sector, but controlling the lion's share of its resources. This disparity between small and large is even clearer when we look at funding resources. Government funding has become increasingly important for small charities, rising to 37% of their income in 21-22, a dramatic increase from 15% the previous year. At the same time, public donations have plummeted from 54% to 25%, creating further strain. So while the sector as a whole shows signs of stability, small charities are fighting an uphill battle. The critical question is, how do we ensure the survival of these vital organizations, which form the backbone of our communities? In the next slide, we'll look at the bigger picture. Where is the money actually coming from for the voluntary sector as a whole? In 21-22, the sector generated an impressive 69.1 billion in income. This figure underscores the vital role that charities play, not just in our communities, but in our economy. But as always, the devil is in the detail. The public is the backbone of the sector, contributing nearly half, that's nearly 48% of all income. This includes voluntary donations, legacies, membership fees, and spending in charity shops. It reflects the incredible generosity and trust of people across the UK. The second largest contributor is government funding at 26%. While this is still substantial, it's dropped from 30% the year before. This trend is deeply concerning and highlights the growing uncertainty around public sector funding. Smaller income streams such as voluntary sector income at 12%, investments at 9%, private sector at 3%, and national lottery at 1% do add some diversity, but they can't fully offset the reliance on the top two funding sources. Here's why this matters. Smaller charities are disproportionately dependent on local fundraising and small-scale grants. They don't have the same access to large government contracts or investment returns as bigger players. So when the government funding shrinks, as it has, the ripple effects hit smaller charities the hardest. And with the public already stretched thin, we must ask, how can small charities continue to meet rising demands with fewer resources? In the next slide, we'll take a closer look at how charities are generating their income, because this sheds light on the growing inequalities within the sector. The sector's income can be grouped into three main types: Firstly, you've got voluntary income, which is about donations, grants, sponsorships. Then you've got earned income from contracts, membership fees, and charity shops. And finally, you've got investment income that comes from returns from investments, rents, and deposits. In 21-22, voluntary and earned income were almost evenly split, making up 46% and 45% of total income, respectively. But investment income at just 9% lags far behind. While these figures have remained stable, stability doesn't mean equity. Why? Let's look at the distribution. The largest organizations, major and super major, control a staggering 57% of the sector's income and spending. At the other end, micro and small charities account for just 3%. To put this into perspective, micro organizations' median income was a mere £3,400 per year, while super majors' median income reached £254.1 million, a 16% jump from the previous year. This widening wealth gap matters because smaller charities are deeply embedded in their communities, addressing grassroots needs. So when their financial resilience diminishes, so does their ability to serve. This tells us two things. First, smaller charities are diversifying their income streams, but often as a survival mechanism rather than as strategic growth. Secondly, larger organizations with their brand power can secure stable income sources more easily, widening the gap. In short, the sector is surviving but not thriving equally. The resilience we see in the sector's finances hides a troubling reality. Small charities are being left behind. In the next slide, we'll talk about the questions it poses. As we've seen, small charities are at the heart of our communities, but they face disproportionate challenges. So how do we respond? Firstly, survival. How can smaller organizations survive in an increasingly challenging environment? The second question to think of is around sustainability. How can they balance growing demands with shrinking resources? And finally, resilience. Is the financial recovery we are seeing sustainable? Ultimately, we must ask ourselves, how do we ease the growing pressures on small charities so that they can focus on vital work? This isn't just about survival, it's about ensuring these organizations thrive for the benefit of the communities that they serve. As we now move into theme 2, let's start with a quick poll, and hopefully this time all of you can see the polls coming up on your screen. I'll give you a few moments to answer. This is about the voluntary sector workforce and what percentage of the sector workforce works either at home or in a hybrid arrangement. Take a moment to select your answer and we'll reveal the results shortly. Let's look at the results. So people are saying 39%. 39% is the majority. Very few people think it's 11%. Ooh, interesting. All right, let's see what's the correct answer. Thank you very much for your responses. So here's the answer. The correct answer is 39%. A significant 39% of employees in the voluntary sector work either from home or in a hybrid arrangement. That's a higher proportion than in both the public and the private sectors. This shift is just one of the ways the sector's workforce is changing. Let's explore these trends and see what they mean for the future in our next slide. So our workforce is the backbone of the voluntary sector, with nearly 1 million people, 3% of the UK workforce, dedicated to making a difference. But the data shows us that while we have much to celebrate, there are critical challenges we must address. First, let's acknowledge a strength. 2/3 of the workforce are women, making the voluntary sector the most attractive industry for women in the UK. But the question remains, how do we build on this momentum and ensure the sector remains a leader in gender equity? Now, for a more pressing challenge, which is age imbalance. The sector has the oldest workforce in the UK, with 28% aged 55 and over. This is far higher than in other industries. At the other end, only 6% of the workforce is under the age of 25 years, half the figure seen in the private sector. This tells us that we need to create clearer pathways for young people, such as apprenticeships, graduate schemes, so that we can refresh and energize the workforce. On diversity, we've seen some progress. 13% of the workforce is now from global majority backgrounds, up from 9% in 2022. However, this still lags behind both the public and private sectors. It's a reminder that the sector must work harder to reflect the communities it serves. Finally, let's talk a bit about working patterns. By the end of 2023, 39% of employees were working remotely or in hybrid setups, a much higher proportion than in other sectors. This flexibility brings benefits, but it also raises questions about how we maintain collaboration, mission focus, and equity for employees who face barriers to remote work. These trends challenge us to rethink workforce development. How do we attract younger talent, ensure diversity and inclusion, and adapt to new working patterns? In the next slide, you will see that theme 2 leaves us with these critical questions. First, how do we attract young talent? How do we accelerate diversity? How do we ensure flexible work benefits all employees? And how do we prepare for generational change? These challenges demand urgent attention if we are to create a workforce that's diverse, inclusive, and equipped for the future. Let's now dive into theme 3, which examines the decline in government funding. It's a trend that's reshaping the sector in profound ways. Before we go straight into the slide, let's start with a quick poll to see what you think. I'll give you a few minutes, maybe a few seconds actually. Select your answer and we'll reveal the results shortly. In 2020-21, government funding made up 30% of the sector's income. What do you think the percentage is in 21-22? Has it increased or has it decreased? That's really impressive. Got a very knowledgeable audience. That's correct. That's the right answer, 26%. That's correct. Yes, government funding as a proportion of the sector's income fell from 30% to 26% in just 1 year. This decline is more than just a percentage, though. It's a trend that's reshaping how charities operate, especially for those at the heart of our communities. Let's explore what this means in the next slide. Government funding is shrinking and it's hitting smallest charities the hardest. In 21-22, government funding accounted for just 26% of the sector's total income, down from 30% the previous year. This decline is significant, especially when you consider that 74% of this funding came from contracts, not grants. And contracts often come with stricter terms, leaving less flexibility for charities to respond to community needs. But the most troubling part is micro and small charities, which are essential for community-level services, received only 4% of total government funding. Despite this, they rely far more on government income. 37% of their income comes from government support, compared to just 26% for larger organizations. Meanwhile, larger organizations, those with income more than 1 million, dominate the funding landscape. They receive 61% of all government funding. This disparity underscores a growing divide where the largest organizations thrive and smaller ones struggle to stay afloat. Breaking it down further, central government remains the largest contributor, accounting for 48% of all government funding, though this dropped from 51% in the previous year. Local government funding has held steady at 44%. These numbers highlight a troubling reality. As government funding declines, the organizations most reliant on it are being squeezed the hardest. This raises an urgent question. How can we sustain essential services, especially at the community level, with diminishing government support? In the next slide, let's break down the distribution of government funding and its impact on organizations of all different sizes. The numbers tell a stark story. Larger organizations, those with income over 1 million, received 61% of government funding. So these well-resourced organizations are much better positioned to secure grants and contracts from government. In contrast, micro and small organizations, which play a critical role in communities, received just 4% of government funding. What's more concerning is the dependency gap. For micro and small organizations, 37% of their income comes from government funding, compared to just 26% for large organizations. This disparity highlights a troubling inequity. The organizations that are most reliant on government funding are receiving the smallest share. So why does this matter? As contracts dominate government funding, making up 74%, smaller organizations, which often lack the capacity to manage complex contractual requirements, face significant barriers to accessing this kind of support. So the question we must ask is, how do we ensure that organizations that are at the heart of our communities, those providing grassroots services, aren't left behind as government funding continues to fall? In the next slide, you'll see that theme 3 brings us to some of the toughest questions our sector faces. First, how can smaller charities and organizations survive as government funding dwindles? These charities often deliver frontline services, yet they receive only a small percentage of government income. Without adequate funding, we risk losing critical services in our local communities. Second, how can the sector diversify its funding streams? With government funding becoming less reliable, charities need to explore other sources, such as public donations, earned income, or private sector partnerships. Are we ready to innovate as a sector? Finally, what role should the government play in supporting the sector moving forward? Can we continue to rely on contracts, or is it time to rethink how the government partners with charities to ensure long-term sustainability? These are the questions we must address to secure a sustainable future for the sector and the communities it serves. In the next slide, let's take a moment to briefly revisit the key questions these 3 themes pose, questions that are central to the challenges and opportunities ahead. Theme 1, how do we ease the pressures on small charities so that they can focus on their critical work rather than being overwhelmed by financial and operational challenges? Theme 2, how do we attract new talent, embrace diversity, and adapt to evolving workforce needs while addressing pressing challenges today? And in the third theme, how can we best collaborate with central and local government, especially post-election, to tackle the challenges facing our communities and ensure sustainable impact? These aren't just abstract ideas, they are practical challenges we all face in the sector. As we reflect on them, let's consider how they align with your work and your vision for the sector. Now let's move on to how you can take these insights and apply them to your organization. So I've just given you a snapshot of what the Almanac has to offer, key findings and insights. But let's step back and think about what this resource truly is. The The Almanac isn't just a report, it's a living, breathing data resource designed for you to explore, interrogate, and use in ways that matter the most to your organization. Here are three practical ways in which you can use it. Firstly, in influencing, you can use the Almanac as a tool for advocacy, whether you're engaging with policymakers, funders, or local authorities. The data provides solid evidence to demonstrate the value of your work and the sector's vital role in society. Secondly, in your strategic organizational work, if you're planning your financial future for your organization, the Almanac helps you understand income sources and sector-wide trends. Are you developing a fundraising strategy? Then you can use the Almanac to identify gaps in your funding streams, or you can analyze risks. You can benchmark your organization against others and make data-informed decisions about your priorities. And finally, you can use the Almanac as a window to understand the wider sector trends, from workforce dynamics to diversity and inclusion challenges. If you're looking for tailored insights, reach out to NCVO. We'll try our best to help you navigate and apply this data to address your organization's big questions. Here's the exciting part: the Almanac isn't static. With redevelopment plans, including more digital tools, more machine learnings, more and better, smarter data capabilities, every day we are ensuring it remains the go-to resource for our sector, adapting to your needs as they evolve. And don't forget, we are here for you. So if you have any questions, hopefully you've popped them into the Q&A function and not the chat. And my colleagues KK and Henry will join me shortly to answer as many of them as we can. So let's dive straight into the questions. I will bring up the list of questions, and KK, I'm going to ask you one of the first questions. Can you define small, micro, and large organizations?
Just a second. Yeah. Hi everyone. Yeah, so we have a stratification system that goes by income size. We first have charities that don't report any income at all, so we don't include them in any detailed numbers. Then come the micro charities, which have their incomes less than 10,000 per annum. And then we go to small, which are between 10,000 and 100,000. Then there are medium charities that are from 100,000 to 1 million pounds per annum. And then the next is large charities, which are from 1 million to 10 million. Then there's major from 10 to 100. And then finally, anything above 100 are the super major charities. These are our stratifications.
Thanks, KK. I think some organizations also define identify the size of organizations by number of people. But we've just followed ONS's system, and the Almanac follows their methodology by classifying it by income. We've also got Henry on the screen. Henry, my next question is for you. I'll ask you the question on one of the questions is, I'd be really interested to understand more about investment income, as the breakdown shows even small charities are achieving perhaps more than expected in investment income. Are these charities actually mostly small grant-making foundations who are investing their endowments? KK, shall I first come to you and then to Henry for your thoughts?
I have to be very honest, I wasn't listening to answer your question in the
it's about the investment income. Breakdown shows for small charities, and are these charities actually mostly small grant-making foundations who are investing their endowments? Do we have data on endowments?
No, we don't. We know that there are certain, so the way charities are supposed to report is they give their total income and they just break it down by sources. So one of those sources is investments, but we don't know the details of investments from most charities. So we don't go further into the breakdown of investments.
Yeah.
So we don't have any idea about endowments.
I think some of the questions, it's also about how charities record their data. So there is no set template by the Charity Commission in how data is recorded. So charities enter whatever information that they have in their annual statements. The smaller the charity is, the less resources they have to really fill out in too much detail. So very niche breakdown details, granular details often get missed out because they are not filled out. We don't have that information in the first place to do the analysis. So obviously for us, from a data analysis perspective, the more data we have, the more easier it is for us to give the breakdown. Henry, did you have any thoughts on this or any of the questions that have come up in the chat?
I don't think I'd have anything to add from what KK said. I think that's a pretty accurate summary of what we've got.
Thanks, Henry. I did get a question about national insurance changes. So there's one question which says, is the point related to smallest being hardest hit still likely to be true with national insurance changes? Would either of you like to comment on that? We recently did a project on national insurance changes.
I'm happy to jump in and give KK a rest for a little bit. So I think, as Nara said, we've recently done a piece of work looking at the impact of the national insurance changes. I'd encourage you all to go on the NSPHERE website and see some of the data that we pulled out there. I think in terms of the way, I suppose, events like the national insurance changes impact on the data, we have the data with a little bit of a time lag because we take it from the Charity Commission, the Charity Commission's data, which in and of itself has a slight lag in when we can get it and when we can go through the method of kind of cleaning and going through the sample to pull the data out. So things like the effect of the national insurance contributions changes, that's something that we'll see in kind of future iterations of the Almanac.
Thank you. Thanks, Henry. KK, did you want to add any thoughts to this?
Yeah, I think Henry's pretty much covered it. Most current events, as we see them, are time lagged, and so is our annual analysis. But to the point of small charities being affected, that is the one thing that I'd like to answer, where I would say that we have noticed that small and micro charities are going to stay unaffected because most of them fall within the threshold limits and would benefit. But as we go higher in size, that is where the NICs actually start to show an impact. But we'll see that in the future. We can't say at the moment.
And Leah's asked a question, is it possible to get a link posted to the work you've done on NI changes? I'm sure Lorena or Holly can post that in the chat. So I think it's there. Holly's already done that. Perfect. Thanks, Holly. Moving on to some of the other questions. Understandably, it doesn't include data from unincorporated and so unregistered community groups. Some estimates are that civic action is even greater than the registered charities part of the sector. What can be done to ensure all who use the Almanac data understand the significant scale of unincorporated civic action? I am not entirely sure about this category, unincorporated. Is it, KK, do we analyze this?
No, I don't think so.
The problem is with very niche categories, we don't even have enough data. Sometimes we don't even get, out of all the samples, we don't even get a significant amount of categories to analyze the data. Maybe you can expand a little bit more in the chat, and we'll take it outside of this and deal with that. I've got a question from Jay Kennedy, DSC. This data covers part of the pandemic. Is it likely that the spike in government funding for small charities is down to pandemic-related support? Henry, would you like to answer this question? It's from a perspective of the pandemic-related government funding for small charities because of pandemic-related support. We do know that during this time, the government injected 750 million in grants to charities, and that is the reason why there's been a spike in government funding. But this is not usual, though. It sort of bucks the trend. Henry, would you like to add something more to this?
I mean, I think you've kind of covered it there. Yeah, exactly that. It's we see sort of quite a visible spike, I think, in one of the charts that I showed about the kind of funding trends that's around the pandemic. So yeah, I mean, I think we had a couple of questions come through the chat about this, and I think it's spot on. You know, it was a bit of, obviously it was an anomalous time in a lot of ways, and it presented in the kind of funding data with that spike in government funding that we're now seeing fall off.
Yeah, thanks, Henry, and thanks, Jay, for the question. Leah has asked, given how much money flows through the sector, do you look at how much of it stays in local or even UK economy? Is it better for small versus large organizations? I think this is probably a question for KK. If you remember the top 10 charities in the UK by income, we have some of them are international charities that actually spend some of their income in countries abroad, but that's a very small number. Most of them work in the UK economy, so the money goes back to the UK economy. In terms of local, it's a little bit more difficult to say because we take our data from the Charity Commission website, and regional information is just noted down in the charity headquarters. So if a charity is based in London, and even though it's got branches all over the UK, the income will show as if it's mostly based in London, unless it's a federated charity like, say, Age UK or MenCap, with their separate branches having their own separate charity registration numbers. It's a bit more difficult to say. But Leah, most of our income stays in the UK economy, to answer your question. KK, if you have a list of the top 10 charities, maybe you can post that in the chat when you get a chance. Ewan has a question. Can we also talk about medium-sized charities, please? We've got lots of information on medium-sized charities in the almanac. There's much more in detail that you'll find about medium-sized charities. The thing we go down into great detail about medium-sized charities, small and large, and you'll find that some organizations, you may also prefer to club it together with small and medium, so you can have a look at how you want to categorize it. But we give all the details in our full report. There's one question from Daksha. Can we interrogate the data for local stats? We do have data for local stats, KK. I think we've got we have it by county, don't we? By borough, by different boroughs.
We do have data by borough. It's all present. It is presented in the almanac. The almanac tables that are published. It's probably in a lot more detail than we can talk about. But yeah, there are some insights on very regional data from the charter.
And it's all publicly available, so you can find that on our website. Thanks from Daksha. There's a question from Samantha. It says, Henry, perhaps this question is for you. This 2019-2020 data from the perspective of economics data is really interesting. VCSE has a procurement link. There's a graph I'd like to share to show the relationships between receipt of contract and grant income, but can't do so in this text box. Is there a breakdown of the proportion of social services activity-based charities split down for each size group? I think we do. I think we have a breakdown by subsector, but we haven't broken down social services. Henry, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I think we have the breakdown by subsector. I don't think within subsector we break down by size bands. Yeah, I'm from a methodological perspective, I'm not sure if there's a reason behind that. KK, do you know? Don't know if you want
Um, Yeah, this is probably a breakdown of our breakdown. We haven't gone that deep into it, and I don't think I'm not sure, but I don't think it's not available. I don't think it's available either. Like it's a little too detailed, but it is possibly something that we can look into for future almanacs.
Yeah. And we do have the data for social services,
Yeah.
but not social
Which-
services by micro, small. It's not that we can't do it. We can do that, but we can't, it's just something we haven't done before, and it
Yeah, we have.
probably doesn't, nobody has requested that before.
No, it's also that it's tougher to generate this data with smaller charities because the way annual returns work are smaller charities aren't scrutinized as much to sort of go into too much detail about their annual reports. So it's not very clear where they're spending their money. But as we go into larger charities, we have a lot more clarity. So it sort of gets blurry when you go to smaller charities. That's another reason why it's probably not picked up yet.
Yeah. Another methodology question from Andrea. Thank you. We make extensive use of Almanac data. That's great, Andrea. Thank you. Each year we ask whether it can be cut at district level. This would add significant value to the majority of local-based charities and members of NCVO. When will this be possible, please? So can we cut it at district level? Because at the moment it's by boroughs.
Yeah, it is possible to do so. We do have postcodes of registered addresses. So it might be possible, but then we don't have the exact area of operations for all of these, for all the charities. So it might be something that we can look into definitely, but I'm not sure if knowing the region of registration would be enough to know their area of operation as well.
Perfect. We still have lots of questions that are coming in and not enough time. I'll just take one final question, and Henry, I can see, is typing the answers to some of the questions here. And KK, if you could also type the answers to the questions on Scottish data, because I've seen a few come in on Scottish data. And somebody else asked us about a percentage of organizations with no paid staff. That is volunteers, isn't it? Unpaid staff is volunteers. Henry, would you like to take that final question before?
Yeah, sorry, what was that? What was that question?
What
Sorry.
percentage of organizations have no paid staff?
Or I might have to come back to you on that. I don't think I have that exactly to my fingertips, I'm afraid.
But it is volunteering. Those organizations, someone who is an unpaid member is counted as a volunteer. So we don't include them in our workforce data. We include them in our volunteering data.
No, I think the question might also mean what percentage of organizations have
Yeah.
no staff on payroll,
Oh,
no salary bills at all. I'm
yeah.
not
And
sure.
Pip has also said something in the chat. It includes board members who are unpaid, so it
Yeah.
links to governance. Maybe let's get Henry, we can get back to this and answer this in the next few minutes, maybe if it's
Sounds good.
possible. Running short of time and conscious of the time and want to keep to time. If let's go back to the slides, please. Yeah. No, I think we had really very thoughtful and insightful questions, and perhaps after the session today, we can send some of the unanswered questions as a response. Really, really grateful. Thank you so much for your questions. It's clear that the challenges and opportunities we've discussed resonate deeply with all of you, and your engagement highlights the shared commitment that we all have in strengthening our sector. As we wrap up today, I want to leave you with this thought. What we've discussed today is just the beginning. The 2024 UK Civil Society Almanac is more than a report. It's a tool, a resource, and a guide for navigating the complexities of our sector. It doesn't just tell us where we are, it equips us to ask and answer where we are heading. From funding trends to workforce challenges, the Almanac provides the data and insights we need to build a stronger, more resilient future. To ensure you don't miss out, simply scan the QR code on the screen to sign up for your copy of the full report. In fact, you'll find some of your questions will be answered in the full report. And I'd really like to extend a heartfelt thank you to all of you today for your time, engagement, and thought-provoking questions today. And special thanks to KK and for Henry supporting the Q&A, and of course to my brilliant colleagues across NCVO who helped make this possible. Finally, in the last slide as we close, I want to thank you once again for joining us. Your participation and commitment to the sector really inspire us to keep doing what we do. If you have any further thoughts, questions, insights, please don't hesitate to reach out to our research inbox, research@ncvo.org.uk. And thank you very much. And I hope you leave today's session with fresh ideas, new questions, and a deeper connection to the incredible work we do as a sector. Take care all and have a lovely day. Thank you.